Well, I speak Spanish, but
Naturalmente.
I don't know if everyone that's listening speaks Spanish.
No,
so.
no. We shouldn't do it in Spanish, and especially because we'll come into a grinding halt with my Spanish rhyme. I do that enough with the English words. So, anyway, so that's just the way it is. No worries. We'll just carry on. Okay, so it'll just be you and me. So thank God for you. I'm glad that you have a good internet connection.
I know today it decided to be good. Usually it's on and off and up and down, especially with the weather.
Well, know
today.
One thing that will help is that that it's just two of us. I think that makes it a little better, too.
Right.
Facebook is ready when you're ready.
Okay, so I'm turning off my cell phone just in case you might want to turn off your cell phone just to make sure it doesn't go off while we're talking. And I didn't reset the clock here. I turned it off because we were so close to the end. I had a feeling we might go over, and I didn't want that buzzer going off. But I think we made it just in time.
I think you did too.
Oh, good. Okay, so if you're ready, let me just look at one more thing so I introduce you correctly. That's the other thing I just wanted to double check again before I forget. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So by the way, as far as a conversation, you can take us anywhere you want to when there's only two of us. And this is my learning edge. I don't consider myself any kind of an expert. So anyway, let me just, Upstate New York Black and Latino Pride. And then Communications Director, Communications and Statewide Advocacy. That's actually in the description, but I probably won't say that part. But Upstate New York Black and Latino Pride. And then...
you could probably just say, that I'm a communications professional and statewide advocacy, and, that I do statewide advocacy just because that probably encompasses, everything that I do a little bit better.
Well, don't be afraid to chime in if I'm missing some part of it, because one thing I try to get it in my brain such that I don't have to read it, because reading it always sounds a little hokey or something, right? But
right.
Yeah, but communications director and communications specialist and statewide advocacy, I think I can remember that. And the basic thing we're going to talk about, we already talked about it, and I know we'll do fine. Just about its identities and the fluidity, how homophobia is related, the intersectionality, and how homophobia is related to racism and other bigotry, and how things have changed, how they haven't changed, and what we're looking to change, and also especially never to give too short a shrift to how, what people can do to help or learn more and just move things along. So, okay. So do you feel ready? Do you have water if you need it?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, so we're ready.
Okay, step one, throw the silver switch.
Yep.
Light is on.
Yes.
Clock is moving backwards.
Yes.
Put the clapper in front of your face. When you hit the clapper, you're on the air.
Okay. Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded here at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future. Also in the home of our friend and producer, Richard Wicca. Thanks, Richard. Also, we have our broadcast going out on Buffalo's original alternative radio station, WBNY, that's 91.3 FM, out of Buff State. We appreciate them so much at Buff State. And speaking of appreciation, we want to appreciate and remember always that we're on stolen Haudenosaunee land, that probably for most of us listening on Seneca land, but certainly the Haudenosaunee and our indigenous brothers and sisters have so much, we want to have so many injustices that they've suffered, that we want to really emphasize remembering their rights, respecting their rights and their wisdom, trying to uphold that, and also following their example in remembering our Mother Earth and being thankful, trying to acknowledge and be thankful for all of the creatures, the plants and animals, the different elements of the creation, and to try to learn to live as originally instructed so that life can continue in this creation. That's a sort of like a mini Gnonio. And so then to say in thankfulness and acknowledgement, Yahweh, and then the people say Nyo. So you could say Nyo.
No,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
that's a first for me. Did I do good?
Oh, you did great. Yes, you did great. And so, for those who haven't listened before, this is as I'm Vicki Ross. I'm the communication. I'm getting ahead of myself. I am the community coordinator for the Western ERP Center, and very excited about our topic and our special guest. So our special guest is Alexandre Burgos, who is here, who is a wonderful young activist. He is he's with the Upstate New York Black and Latinx Pride, and also is communications director, is a communications specialist, and does statewide advocacy. And just very grateful to have you on the show, Alex.
Yes, thank you so much for the invite. I'm super happy to be here. I'm super excited to have this conversation and, push the message that is so near and dear to my heart even further.
Oh, good. Well, I'm excited too. And I just want to say, our topic, as we sort of drew it up, is really LGBTQ issues, or less issues, yes, but even more specifically identities, and also intersectionality. So there's plenty to unpack there, and we just have just under an hour to do it in. But we still want to start off with values. So I always find it's a good way to just sort of, especially because there's so many issues and so many changes needed, that if we start off with the values that we want to uphold, both in the conversation but also in the issue. What's driving us, what values are driving us in this issue. So I'm going to ask you, Alex, any value or a couple of values that you want to mention.
Well, I think for me, the connective driving force behind everything that I do really is love and kindness. And I think that in my life, those have been sort of the universal healers, not only of the world. I believe that will heal the world. I believe that will restore the world back into balance. But in my life, that has been, a mechanism for change and a restoration, both in the difficult times and with the challenges ahead. That's really where I center myself, is on those values of love and kindness, not only in myself, but in others in the world.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, actually, I'm often, truth and I always think of Dr. King's saying, I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. So I'm just going to thank you for bringing up love, because I think we can't think about it too much or emphasize it too much. It's what causes all the great activism. It's what makes the world go round. It's, all we need is love. And we might need a few other things as well, but we really, really, really need love. And but the other thing, truth. And that's the other thing, is sort of to really look, yes, we want to build on strengths and everything, but we also want to acknowledge the work that needs to be done, or the truth of what has been done, or where we're at. So that truth, I think that will come out very well in this conversation too. So why don't we start with really about identities. So one of the things, and I've found this really interesting, that it's gone, so there's, well, first there was first there was, people being, how the terminology has changed, right? So now it's LGBTQ, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. And but then there's all, and then it could be IA, or it could be even, now there's all kinds of other descriptors or words or so why don't you sort of walk people through your, how you would explain that, and sort of where we're at now in terms of identity and identities.
Well, I think the most important thing to realize is that terminology changes, right? That is a normal part of any society.
Sure.
Is that terminology has always changed. Before we didn't have a word to describe, people with those identities, and now we do have those words. And I think that as time goes on, we will continue to discover new words and discover additional identities that need representation. So I really think that the most important thing with that is to recognize that we're not always perfect. We're not always going to be perfect, but the most important thing is to be open.
Right.
And that's what I think is the most beautiful thing about, more people coming in and feeling represented and identifying with our community, is that it continues to be a learning experience. And with that learning experience, we learn to be more loving. We learn to be more kind. We learn to be more accepting, compassionate towards others. I also think it's worth noting that for many people, with folks in our community who identify as non-binary or other intersections of gender, some people, identify a lot with gender fluidity or even sexual or romantic fluidity. And I think that those people deserve a lot of visibility and deserve representation too. And I think it's also worth noting that people's identities are valid regardless as to how long they last or how they evolved or how they shift or change.
Right.
So I think, we are still learning all as a community. We are in the, I suppose, first generation of social media, where we have mass communication happening so instantaneously at once, that these conversations are finally being had on a universal level. And so, I think with that, we're just going to learn to do better as time goes on.
Well, that's so interesting to me as you're telling it. I think about now, well, first, there's so many different aspects. One thing is that there was a lot that was going on that was either suppressed, denied, or not discussed. So there were words, and actually there were plenty of very nasty or discriminatory words that were used as well. But there was sort of like, well, there was, there's just, cisgendered or heterosexual, and then there's either gay or lesbian, and that was all. And then, I think one of the things that's become so beautiful to me is this idea with the gender fluidity and everything, that people don't need to be locked into these very rigid roles. And I wonder about this, is that all of that existed before. There were other different people that had different identities or different, but it was probably, I think it was less common, and it was certainly less recognized, except for in some very, in some other societies it may be that it was more recognized. But in a lot of, certainly Western societies, it was largely not recognized or not acknowledged.
Yes, and I think it's important to highlight the word Western societies, because a lot of our history is very Western based, at least what is taught to us.
Right.
Actually, if you look at it, the history of queer people, trans people, can date back even to ancient Egypt.
Right.
It can date back to Babylonian times. It can
Right.
date back to biblical times.
Right.
This is not something new. This is not something that is recent history. You know, LGBTQ history has always existed, right? Whether it's been documented or not, there is a history, at least from a humanitarian standpoint, from a sort of metaphysical standpoint, LGBTQ history has always been a thing because there have always been queer people on this planet.
Right.
And animals too. I mean,
Right.
you know, whether you know, there are animals that are, you know, that that have romantic and sexual attraction to other animals of the same sex. And
Right.
I guess when you really think about it that way, animals are part of LGBT history too.
Right, right. They are. And it's funny because we were just doing a show on Black history and we were talking about all the suppression and, you know, mythology really, and especially suppression of history that the Western, you know, dominant Western forces did not want in there. They didn't want to acknowledge. Actually, it's funny in the Gnonio that I just did, and first of all, that when the Gnonio is done, normally it can go on for hours or even days, right? So I just doing this little piece of it, but the you know, acknowledge, the first thing is to acknowledge, appreciate, and then about the going on and doing as originally instructed, which has to do with the path of the peacemaker and things like that. But to acknowledge and appreciate, you know, that acknowledging has to come first. That's the truth. And the appreciate, that's the love, you know. So that when it's a question of domination, like it is in so much of Western society, it has been, that's when those things get suppressed. Because they're not in the story that the dominant forces want to tell, or where the dominant forces are active.
There's a narrative that they want to keep.
Right,
That narrative that narrative preserves systems of power.
Right.
And with those systems of power in place, there are benefits, which we now know. We have a term for that. We know that to be privilege.
Right.
You know, and we know that privilege is social. We know that privilege is systemic. We know that privilege exists in basically every facet of our lives. And I think having a recognition of it and being consciously aware of it is the first way to dismantle it, not only within yourself, but within your community at large. And also, I think it's important to recognize that all of us are born into the system of privilege, whether we are privileged or unprivileged. There's also a mindset that is very deeply embedded in all of us, a mindset that is systemic, sort of this cultural malignancy that, you know, can only take collective effort and unity to sort of wipe away. But, you know, that is a much larger issue than any one of us in this room. But, you know, each one of us, though it is a much larger issue, I think it's important for us not to relinquish our power and not to relinquish the capability we have to become and be catalysts for change. So though I recognize it's something that's much beyond me, I realize that in my life, in my community, and the people around me, I still have the power to make that change.
Right. Well, that is so inspiring and so true. So I think, you know, what we do to try to make the changes happen, and what we do to really understand and acknowledge and appreciate what you said, you know, of unity. That unity doesn't mean that there's just one, you know, dominant force or one view of things, but that unity would be to see people, all the individuals and all the the variations, as we were just saying, just in terms of gender, gender and sexual preference, that there are just now so many different, really countless different ways of feeling, describing, or it changing, right? So with the fluidity, it just becomes this, almost kaleidoscopic, right? In the variations that are available, so it doesn't have to be unidimensional.
Right, and I think
view. Go ahead.
the unity that we strive for, the unity that I envision at least, is not unity where everyone is the same or where everybody thinks the same, but where we can all healthily be together, unified in strength and love, and compassion for one another. We could be people from completely different backgrounds of life or even completely different parts of the world, but unity is really recognizing that we are all inextricably connected and intertwined, right? And what happens, maybe with us in our life is just as important as what happens in someone that we may have never even met.
Right.
And that's what unity is about to me. It really is sort of, I guess, I sort of think of like a spider web almost, where, a spider web is large and may not be symmetrical and may have many different parts, or some webs are bigger or smaller than the others. And, there are many different, spiders in this case on it, but they're all together collectively making that web bigger, and they're all becoming stronger in the process. So I think that recognizing that there are those differences that exist and that those differences make us beautiful, but what makes us strong is unity, is coming together.
So all those different identities can come together in unity if we don't think that people need to be the same. That we back to what we were just, that everybody has their human dignity and everybody is accorded their freedom to be who they really are, and as that changes.
Right.
So what would you say in terms of intersectionality within that? So that's back to different identities being even more different, right?
Yeah. So I think when we talk about that, a lot of my work is specific in reaching LGBT people of color, because, first of all, they are some of the most vulnerable, not only in our community, but in society at large.
Right.
And truly, they're a community that has always lacked representation within our community, and society at large has always lacked access, has always lacked space, and most of all, lacks ownership. And I think that the work that I do is so incredibly important because I want to be a model of ownership. I want to be a model of leadership. And I want to show people that they don't have to be, a statistic, or that they don't have to be limited to what the world tells them that they should be, or what they can be, or what they're capable of. And that if they, really put their mind to it and they find people around them that believe in them, that you can do anything. And quite frankly, I really think that you only need one person in your life that really, really believes in you. And with that one person, you can do anything. And I've seen that in my life. I've had many moments in my life where people thought I had ideas that would never happen or would never be successful. And I had a few people that really believed in me and were always on my side. And a lot of those ideas I made happen.
That is so, people have seen that in the research too, is that for children or for any of us, that if you need to have somebody who encourages you, who is, an anchor for you, who has faith in you, and that's really what propels people forward. When we need somebody, when we want to try and do something different.
Right. And I think we're sort of separated so much that we're taught to sort of rely on ourselves and be alone. But I wish that more people would recognize that, in life, we can't do everything alone. And sometimes we need help, and that's okay.
Absolutely.
And quite frankly, we're not meant to be alone.
Right.
It's not in our nature. It's not in our nature.
Right.
And that sort of thinking is conditioning.
Right.
That is conditioned upon us, and it takes a huge amount of effort, and quite frankly, I think a lifelong effort to unlearn that. And so, I think it's very important that we recognize that we do need others in our lives. And when I think about people of color in the LGBT community, that sort of community building piece is something that we have seen that I think is so remarkable and so special about our community, and is a testament to our love and strength.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at things like the ballroom and voguing, and the way that, people of color in our community express themselves through art and music and dance and chosen families, I think that really is such a beautiful testament to the human spirit and resilience and strength, even in the most difficult and challenging of times. Many folks that are in chosen families that participate in the ballroom, even locally, are people that have been kicked out by their biological families or legal families.
Mm-hmm.
And they have found, safety, and they have found family, and they found friends within these groups, within these systems. And I think that really is one of the most beautiful things to come out of perhaps one of the most heartbreaking circumstances that one could go through.
Right.
And in the same realm, I recognize that these challenges are very unique, but there's one thing that is the same between something like racism and homophobia,
Mm-hmm.
Is that they really are a trifecta of a public health crisis, of a systemic crisis,
Right.
that leaves folks like members of the ballroom community, like LGBT people of color, like queer artists, under circumstances that are life-threatening and
Right.
are not rooted in stable conditions or environments where they can thrive. And so I think it's really important that we don't sort of separate these as separate issues, but realize that they are, from the same branch, the same cultural malignancy that I described earlier.
Right. Right. That sort of pathologizing of difference in a way, that where it's funny because we were just talking about identities and individuality, and just that there's so much individuation, and then we increase that even more geometrically when you start to look at intersectionality, which could be, that goes, there are so many different, if we say there's race and ethnicity, there's ethnicity. But anyway, that if we're saying that, but yet it's too much individuation that drives that, the pull up yourself up by the bootstraps kind of thing. That kind of thinking that rejects difference. So it's saying, we're all about individuals, but we're not about individuals. We're about homogeneity, of that people should all think the same way and all look the same way. And the other people who are different, either they need to pretend to be the same, or they're just outcast or ignored. And that's where I want to say that's where the violence comes, either direct violence, right? Or the violence of poverty, the lack of health care, the lack of progress on issues for different people. Where
and I mean, that is violence.
Yes,
that is
exactly.
Systemic violence. That is social violence.
Right.
Physical violence is sort of seen as the only form of violence, but that in itself is violent. I don't see how creating a system where someone is deprived of a home and has no access to basic necessities, how is that not violent?
Right. No, it's absolutely violent and deadly. at times.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think with that being said, it's really important to mention that I hope that, the people listening are keeping up with what's happening, statewide in the legislative system, because with the 2022 legislative convention happening here in the state, there's many proposals that will directly impact the LGBT community. And some of those proposals include, additional funding for organizations that are helping trans people, additional housing services for people living with HIV. And so I hope people recognize that, gay marriage was not the end all be all for our community. And that was not the finite point. That was a humongous and tremendous victory that we made.
Yes.
But there are still other people in our community that still have a lot of victories that have not been seen, that have not been heard, that are not talked about enough. And so I hope that, folks listening recognize that they not only have power, but there's the time when that power needs to be used is kind of now. And it's very important that people become more engaged than ever.
So tell a little bit more about that. Like, first of all, what are some of the bills or issues, and how can people find out more, get more involved with helping with that particular part? So tell about the convention first.
Yeah, so this will be the 2022 legislative session here in New York State. And the state sessions begin, they adjourn, they convene for these special sessions. There are many changes that are going to happen. There's like redistricting, which is happening right now. There are many, bills that are being put into place that are being voted on during this time. And this is the time to really push it and push our mission forward. And then as far as the bills, there is the LGBTQ Center in New York, and they have information on all those bills, including ways that you can help with each individual bill, but then also petitions you can sign, email communications that you can receive. And those are, that's a great way to get involved.
So what's their website?
Their website is gaycenter.org/LGBTQ power. So, there's specific bills. So there's like the Gender Identity, Respect, Dignity, and Safety Act. There is, the LGBT Long-Term Care Facility Bill of Rights. There's the Comprehensive Sex Education in Schools. There's Transgender and GNC Wellness and Equity Fund, which would secure funding, again, as I mentioned, for organizations that are helping trans people. Funding for the LGBT Health and Human Services Network. So those are just, some of the bills that are currently, in need of support that will directly impact and support our community. So
how have our local legislators been on this? Who would you say, is there a champion? Is there somebody that our go-to person on any of these bills? Or
at the moment, I'm not sure. And the only reason I say that is because a lot of what I do is not really on the local level. It's more so on the state level. Well, I do a lot of work on the local level, and this is mostly a state issue. And so I talk predominantly with state elected officials as opposed to local elected folks. And this is in collaboration with many different organizations. I obviously don't have like these people's contacts on my phone, and I can just call them at any given time. But again, when we come together as a community, they hear our voice and they recognize that these changes need to happen across the state to support our community. And not just in Pride Month during June, but these are changes that need to be implemented year round. And that is the point of the legislative session. And I really hope that we have, ideally all these victories, for our community.
Well, we definitely want to help with that, and we do have a gender justice task force in the Western New York Peace Center. So Talia Rodriguez is the head of that. You know Talia, right?
Yep, sure
Of course
do.
you do. Of course you do. So anyway, so that's something that, I know she's, well, I don't know anyone who isn't swamped, and she is certainly one of them. But we definitely would, want to support all of those bills and help organize awareness, increased awareness and activity over them. Because there's so much for people to do. And I really feel like one of the things that we've learned is, that domination and that the power structures that hold people down, hold down difference, where one thing I'll mention is that the power wheel. Are you familiar with the power wheel, where there's an inner circle and an outer circle, and there's all these different variables? So whether it's cisgendered or not, right? Or it's or people are heterosexual or homosexual, or male or female, or higher socioeconomic or lower, so there's all these different elements, and the in circle are the people with the more power, and the
power
people
and
in
control.
right, and
the closer you're in, the more.
Right, the more. Sure.
Right, the
and
closer
then,
you are to the
but
power.
then when you look at all the totality of all these different variables, and there's quite a few of them, we didn't mention race or ethnicity or when you look at all of those, I said socioeconomic, but even that, you could break that down quite a bit, right? That most of us will have some ways that we're in the power, that we have power, and or that we're in the in group, right? And ways that, because we're complex people, right?
Right.
And then the other ways that we're on the out group. But the whole thing breaks down when it's all about power, the way we have it structured in this society, where it's about power over instead of power with. So that when it becomes power with, then all of that will just get tossed aside, and it'll be people power, and it'll be about real communication and cooperation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm well aware of what the power and control wheel is, and I think it's a good visual for folks that are not aware
Sure.
of what maybe privilege can be described as. But and I think it's also important to recognize that there's multiple things can be true at once.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
So
Yes.
people can be privileged, yet they can be unprivileged at the same time.
Right.
And they can experience forms of adversity that maybe others won't experience, or that maybe others in their group do experience, but they don't, or maybe they experience more of that than the average person. So it's really important to recognize that these only help give people a baseline understanding, but a comprehensive understanding of it really is on an individual level.
Sure.
And that takes getting to know someone. And I also think it's really important to recognize that we shouldn't make assumptions about people's privilege or their power.
Right.
Because, for one, it can be offensive. And two, when running an assumption, you run the risk of being wrong.
Right.
So that's very important to keep in mind. I also think it's important to recognize that when we talk about privilege, at least from a systemic standpoint, privilege does not refer to having had an easy life or a hard life.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's something a lot of people tend to forget.
Mm-hmm. Well, and first of all, I didn't mean to be condescending or anything about mentioning that power wheel. I like it because
that's great.
I just like it because, like you said, it's a good visual, and it just makes that point of how multidimensional we are as people. There are so many
Right.
variables. But the other thing I liked about what you said is, that we're each so individual, but you can't, the not making assumptions. I want to say I have that to a fault, though, because there are some times where you almost could, I feel like I don't assume anything because I just don't know. And until I know, I'm not going to be guessing. But in terms of privilege, I know what I wanted to say about intersectionality. So that intersectionality, when you pair it up with the power wheel or the multidimensionality of people, the intersectionality says if you're down on a bunch of really critical power variables, then it's back to what you said about being so vulnerable. Because you're going to get it from this one because of this, and you're going to get it from that one because of that. There are so many places where people are shunted aside if they've got more than one of these, if you're a part of more than one marginalized group. So that's where the injustices get overwhelming, and where the health effects and all the different violence or dangers that a person faces become even more extreme. Although, again, that doesn't tell the whole story, but it just talks about probabilities somewhat.
Right. It definitely serves as a really great baseline. When I see like the visual and I see graphs for that, they're sort of separated, but we know that the circle is one circle. Those are all pieces of the circle, but the circle is one circle. And
Right.
It's a large system, and it's all intertwined. They may be triangles within the circle, but they're both still in the circle.
Well, and then the other thing is that some of those things, back to, it's kind of binary, right? When we're saying you're in or you're out, you're in the in or you're in the out. And you said that right away. Well, you could be more in the in or less in the in, even if you're, let's say for tall or short or male or female, you know what I mean? They're, who's tall and who's short, right? I mean, I'm the tall one. No, I'm not the tall. I'm the tall one because my younger sister is even shorter than me, right? So that makes me the tall one, but I am not the tall one. You know what I mean? I'm 5.5 an inch now. But anyway, that even that sort of oversimplifies it, and doesn't look at the, the individuality, the identity, how our identity has so many elements.
Yeah, there's also definitely like an aspect of relativity to it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it's interesting. Another thing I'd like us to touch on is how we express our identities. When we think about how, are people more free to express their identities than they used to be? So this is back to the question of where were we? How have we made progress? How has it changed people's lives? How has it changed your life, maybe? How, over your young life, I'm going to say relatively young life, right? Even in your lifespan, have you seen changes that have affected your life in different ways? And also the changes that we want to see.
Absolutely. I mean, where we are even a year ago is completely different from where we are now. It's changing, honestly, on a week-to-week basis.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned, it's important to recognize that you won't always be perfect, but it's important to be open and try to keep up.
Right.
But I'll say, 10 years ago, this country was, the climate was completely different for LGBT people. It was completely different for Black and brown people. It was completely different for the intersections of both. And I think COVID has sort of shattered the glass ceiling that has been keeping that all in place. I think it's shattered our rose-colored lens on life. And I think that these conversations have elevated maybe, 10 years faster in the matter of, the span of this pandemic than they would have if this pandemic never happened.
Wait, say that again, please.
So I think that like these conversations have maybe jumped and elevated 10 years forward because of this pandemic. I think this pandemic has revealed so much that these conversations have sort of advanced maybe 10 years instead of maybe 1 or 2 that they would have if the pandemic never happened.
Really?
Right? Because the pandemic shook up our world. It did. It shook up our lives completely.
Absolutely.
And it revealed everything that was fundamentally wrong and flawed. And if that never happened, that revelation would have never come into play. Now, personally, I think this pandemic is horrible, and I wish it never happened.
Sure.
But, it did reveal a lot. It's been very eye-opening for a lot of people, not only for how this world works, but, how the world works around them. And I think that this is going to be, I think coming out of this pandemic, hopefully sooner than later, we're going to see a lot of big changes in this world. We are, and the way that we view life is permanently altered.
Sure. Well, I'm sure that's true. The other thing you're making me think of, Arundhati Roy said, a pandemic is like a portal, that to get us into a whole nother way of being. So that's very interesting in light of what you're saying. Although I want to say, I've also worried about whether the pandemic has also made it even, that people are suffering from, as you said, we're social people, so people need to be together. So, is this sort of, how much is it leading people away from other people versus toward other people? I mean, I still believe what Arundhati Roy said as an overall overarching thing, but maybe, I don't know, maybe we have to go through the groan zone first or something. Maybe there's a part where it gets worse before it gets better or something. I mean, I'm interested in how you're seeing it as something. I mean, there are certainly things that have helped us, but it's as you've said, there's so many things going on that are both to the positive and to the negative, and all changing and all at the same time. That it's very hard to simplify it into whether it's helping, how we're ahead and how we're not.
Well, I think every transition that we make in this world, which is constant, is a miracle. And I recognize that, a lot of the good and the bad, frankly, are hallmarks of society.
Sure.
And that, with every beginning comes an end,
right,
and so forth. And what I'm saying is that in this process, so many of us do learn. And I think it teaches us with this learning to be more compassionate and to learn more about the suffering of others. As we've seen that this suffering has grown so much that it can no longer be ignored or be swept to the side, or, people cannot pretend that it doesn't exist. So while disparities have grown, I think that it's something that can no longer be ignored. And it's something that, many people who once were maybe politically apathetic or socially apathetic have now had a very real awakening of the consequences of the old world that we lived in. And this return to the way that the world was is not healthy, because that old world was not healthy. It wasn't. The world we're in now is not healthy. But I think with getting to such a low point, we can only go up. And I hope that with that up, there is learning, there is significant change. I hope that there is an increase in compassion. When personally speaking, I felt that the old world was so depleted and deficient of that. So there is, and as I mentioned, many things can be true at the same time.
Right.
Absolutely. This can be an awful, turbulent time, which it is. It is an awful time. This is not a good time for a lot of people, for most people probably.
Right.
But with everything bad that happens in life, there's always something to be learned.
Sure.
And I firmly believe that.
Absolutely.
I firmly believe that. And with this bad, there's something that we all need to learn.
Absolutely. I so agree with you. Mm-hmm.
Whether it's coming from, whether people believe that it's just coincidence or it's coming from some higher power, no matter what you believe, I think we can all agree that as people, when bad things happen, there is something to be learned. And there is a lot that we're going to learn from this.
I couldn't agree with you more. And you're making me think of something I say almost, I say it so often, I almost get sick of saying it, that, the wonderful and the terrible are side by side and intimately connected. They really are. So when something, or even there's all kinds of stories in all the different religious traditions of who knows what's good and what's bad. So, something happens and it's good, and then it's, I could start telling some of those stories, but, it's partly how you receive it, or it keeps changing anyway. And, or there's also different elements of it that will be good but might have some also bad effects as well.
Absolutely. Tears can be teachers if we let them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think we have so much to learn, and people are learning. I think one thing, like the fact that our billionaires, we have more billionaires than ever, right? And we have more, and so that the disparities, the economic disparities between people, which are the worst that they've been, they're the worst in the United States than anywhere else in the developed world, in the more developed world. And now they're even still worse and dramatically worse. So is that a bad thing? Well, sure, except is it a good thing if people are all of a sudden, well, wait a minute, we need to change things about this. We need to alter the tax rate, or we need to, have a truly progressive tax rate instead of the regressive taxes that we've had, or, just different changes that we see we need, what we need to do about health, for people's health. And of course, as we see, our health, like is intimately connected. So when everybody's getting sick, everybody else is getting sick. And then there's no health care for other things. So it's back to all of our health is connected. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, so it helps people to learn and helps us to find new ways also as our old structures are getting broken, right?
Yeah, I couldn't, I definitely agree with many things that you mentioned.
So more ways, let us just move into, because we don't have a lot of time left, but we've been and we have been talking about ways that people can help, things that people can do and ways that people can learn more. And I certainly, I'm remembering to look at the LGBTQ Center in New York, gaycenter.org, LGBTQ Power, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's one place that people can go and learn more about the bills and what they can promote, and ask our state legislators to support. Is that mostly who those recommendations should go to? State legislators?
Yeah, I think.
Or is it
we need champions everywhere. We need champions everywhere. So anyone that you can get on board to bring awareness, go for it. I always say the more the merrier with something like that.
Sure.
I think other ways people can help are, obviously monetary, donating to organizations,
Sure.
programs, and individuals that are, supporting our community.
Sure.
Volunteerism in many different forms. That helps a lot. There's always a need for volunteers.
Right.
Continued and committed education to learning and unlearning is very important.
Right.
And I think most of all, just being kind.
Right. Back, sort of brings us back to the full circle of just appreciating people, and really appreciating difference, not making assumptions, just being kind and loving each other. We're we're one in the spirit. That's what I believe. So if somebody else is hurting, we are all hurting.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And if someone else is healing, we're all healing.
Right. So well put. Yes, and there's so much healing needed. There is really so much healing from really, and there's almost no one who doesn't need some healing. And like we said, with the more vulnerable and the more people have been hurt, the more healing is needed. But we'll all heal together. We can just try to make sure people have what they need, and see that we are all connected. And actually the pandemic, that's one more way that we really saw that the pandemic was such a beautiful, as much as it's been a painful and really in some, certainly in some ways tragic experience, and we've lost so many people. But there was somebody was telling me about a sign. I think it was in Ithaca, but there were so many different other indications like this that that to keep our more vulnerable people safe and healthy, the whole world ground to a halt, just stopped. Everything stopped, and that there was no more visible way of showing our love for each other than that. And
right.
I don't say that it isn't a little bit strained at times, and that there haven't been some other elements and other fears and weakness, impatience, or bullying or anything. I mean, all of that is in the mix too. Like you said, so many things that are paradoxical. They're all going on at the same time. So it's very hard to say it's just this way or it's just that way. But at the same time, there is that basic caring for each other, all the mutual aid that's been done, all the attending to people's needs that we're trying to do, and the lessons that we're learning.
Yeah. And I mean, that's all we can do is just continue to learn and do better.
So we have a comment. I think it's just popped up on the Facebook. I think John Ferrallo says, "I wish you luck." Well, I think we all do need luck, and I thank you very much, John, for that sentiment.
Thank you, John.
We're actually, do you know John? No, neither do I. But welcome, John. Thank you. We're glad you're watching. Thank you for wishing us all luck. I think we all need luck, and we all need each other. So do you have a final word? Because we're really now actually on the beginning of almost running out of time. So what's your final thought here for us?
Get involved, learn more, commit to doing better. You don't always have to be perfect, but you should always try to be open.
Right.
And love thy neighbor.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. It's been so great having you on, Alex. Really appreciate that. It's been great, fun, and a big learning experience for me always. So thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the invite.
Oh, well, to be continued. So
okay.
Meanwhile, yes, we'll have other times. So this is Talking Peace, and together we've been talking peace in truth and love. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Great.
thank you so much for
Great.
having me.
Oh, it's been great. It was great having you. So next time, I'm sorry that we weren't able to be joined there. I can think of other people who would have jumped at the chance, but timing is everything. So it really made it nice to just really hear you. So you had some ideas of things to shape, and I hope you got in all the things that you wanted to.
Oh yeah, it was a great conversation. Am I going to be able to? Is it on Facebook for me to rewatch and share?
Yes, it is. Now did you friended Richard, right? Then he put
Yes,
it
I
on
think
your
I said-
Facebook page. He will have put it on your Facebook page. And then the other thing is it will be rebroadcast on Monday at 2 o'clock on WBNY, both live streaming it on their radio station and also on 91.3 FM. And it will be on, the last place I'll mention is on the Western New York Peace Center YouTube channel.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think it's wonderful. You know, I think we both, it was a learning experience for me too.
Oh, good.
So, you know, there's a lot of beautiful things that I took away, and I hope that, you know, I can send this to some people that, you know, not only need to learn something, but are in need of some wisdom and, you know.
Well, some healing. There are a lot of healing things that you said. Very wonderful healing and encouraging things that you said.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, here's a big hug for you. And,
here's a hug for you too.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll be in touch. You have my number.
We sure
We'll
will.
be in touch, and we do 2 shows a week, so I'll be calling you.
Okay.
Thanks
All right,
so much.
well, take care,
Muchas
Vicki.
gracias siempre. Hasta
De nada.
pronto.
Es un placer. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches. Bye
Bye.
for now. Thank you, John Farello. It was nice. It was nice to have you listening to us too. All the best to you. We're all in this together.